Greetings, humans of the internet, and welcome once again to Bowtie Talks. I, of course, am your excellent host, Luke Johnson, coming to you, as usual, from my undisclosed location in Midwest USA, with some more historical insights. And with Easter out of the way, we are now moving on to a new subject, and that, of course, is mining. Because, as someone who has been interested in geology for, well, as long as I can remember, mining has also been a very great interest to me. And I find it fascinating how we are able to go deep into the earth and bring resources from it. So please join me as we dig into, the history of American coal mining. Coal has long been used as a source of energy all around the world, and especially in America. Hopi Native Americans living in what is now Arizona used coal to bake pottery around 1000 AD. For commercial mining, however, we have to jump forward a bit to the colonial periods around the early 1700s, and can go all the way back to Chesterfield County, Virginia in 1701. That was when coal was discovered near a French Huguenot settlement in an area called Midlothian. As several more families started to move into the region, the operation of multiple coal mines began. As the mining operations grew and grew and grew, the operators started searching for miners to work in the coal pits. And miners came from Europe and settled in Midlothian, Virginia. Eventually, several families of investors opened the first commercial coal mines in America, and by the 1730s, commercial coal mining was well underway in Virginia. Some years later, the same coal pits would supply the West Ham cannon factory with the critical fuel source during the Revolutionary War, which prompted the British to invade the town and destroy the mines, which would later be rebuilt. However, Pennsylvania was, to say the least, a little bit late to the party in terms of coal mining, with most industrial places using Virginia coal to supply the energy needed for foundries. The first anthracite coal was discovered in the mid-18th century, and the first coal mine was established in 1775 near Pittston, Pennsylvania. And by the 1820s, coal was being shipped in large quantities out of the region. And I think I really need to stress how important coal was to the American Revolution during this time. 1762, coal was used to manufacture shot, shell, and other raw material. And obviously, coal was used by blacksmiths to help heat the forges. So, as you can tell, coal played a major part in the Revolutionary War. And Pennsylvania coal was known as some of the best around. The coal they were mining was called anthracite, which can be distinguished by its high carbon content and few impurities. And the mining of the resource in the early 19th century spurred rapid industrial growth and urbanization, providing fuel for railroads, factories, and homes across the nation. The specific area I'm talking about is northeastern Pennsylvania. And as the need for coal grew, so did the population. Many immigrants mined the area. English, Welsh, and German immigrants formed a large portion of the increase in population, followed by Polish, Slovakian, Ukrainian, Hungarian, Italian, Russian, and Lithuanian immigrants. And with Pennsylvania done, we can now move on to two other states famous for coal. The first coal mine in the United States in the early 1700s in the colony of Virginia. However, the western part of the colony, what is now called West Virginia, of course, was found to have even more coal deposits. And records have shown that early settlers in the western sections were quite aware of the rich black coal. And coal is reported to have been mined as early as 1810 when a mine was operated near present-day Wheeling, which is in the northern panhandle of West Virginia. Or as I like to call it, the Pinky, because I think that West Virginia looks like a hand doing the phone sign. Look at it, you'll never see it the same way again. And when railroads began connecting the states, there would of course be a greater need for coal to power the locomotives. And in 1843, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad reached present-day Piedmont, West Virginia, and coal was shipped to Baltimore, Maryland. And with the locations out of the way, I think it would be a good time to discuss the men who helped work the mines. Because, as you can imagine, it was dangerous work. People had to worry about cave-ins, fires, and explosions, and just to name a few problems. A miner may not live to see the next day. And when safety became a concern, and wages became a concern, the coal miners began to unionize. Union activity first began in 1842 in Pennsylvania when mine workers protested, demanding higher wages, and armed themselves with clubs and other weapons. The men marched to Pottsville in an attempt to close the mines around the town. When they reached Pottsville, the strikers were confronted by a militia group called the Orwigsburg Blues, and promptly disbanded without gaining any of their objectives. However, this would change in 1848 when an English chartist named John Bates organized a union among the mine workers in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. Within a year, the Bates Union enrolled 5,000 members and felt strong enough to press its demands on the operators. And during the summer of 1849, the miners made their demands clear. They wanted higher wages, $8 to $9 a week for miners, $6 for inside laborers, and $5.50 for outside laborers. And the members of the union made a unique strategy for securing their objective. They blamed their low wages on an unstable market rather than their employers' greed, and they decided to raise coal prices. A strike could be used, they argued, to raise the price of coal by decreasing its supply. They met at Deer Park Farm. Deer Park, I didn't know Deer drove. On July 4th, 1849. Union members passed a strike resolution in the belief that such a suspicion is required for our own good, and for the good of our employees, and for the interests of the coal region generally. The strike lasted 3 weeks and caused a decrease in the supply of coal on the Philadelphia market. When the strikers returned to work, they found themselves locked out by the mine operators. They were locked out for a few weeks until the growing number of orders forced the operators to compromise. However, the union collapsed amid rumors that Bates used union funds for his own good. The fate of the Bates Union proved so discouraging that mine workers in the Schuylkill region waited 11 years before attempting to reorganize. And with the union forming, new laws began to appear to help preserve the lives of coal miners. A new safety law was passed by the West Virginia legislature on February 22, 1833, and it called for the appointment of a mine inspector to make sure the mines were properly drained and ventilated. It was also around this time the company towns began taking hold. Now, anyone wondering what a company town is, it's basically exactly what it sounds like. A town that is owned by one single company. West Virginia coal operators built small towns for their miners. They were usually unincorporated, meaning there were no elected officials and no independent police forces. Company owners hired private detective agencies to watch over the workforce. And needless to say, the conditions were often less than ideal. Workers often built up large debts that they were required to pay off before leaving. And company towns also often housed miners in fenced-in or garden areas. The excuse was they were protecting laborers from unnecessary traveling salesmen. Sounds to me like they were just trying to keep them in there so they could work forever. Company towns also had businesses that were owned by, well, the company. One, perhaps the most famous, of course, is the company store. Miners would be given scrip, as it was called, that could only be used at the company store. Scrip was used as a credit between paydays, and most miners used it very sparingly. Now, scrip was usually, or supposed to be, I should say, an advance against unearned wages and was usable only by the employee to whom it was issued. However, many miners never fully paid their debt to the company store, hence the line in the famous song 16 Tons, "St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store." No matter how small or elaborate the company town was, the company store was usually the social and economic center of the town. It was usually well stocked with items ranging from clothing to furniture to miners' tools. One such company store in the little town of Stearns, Kentucky, the first floor housing the commissary, while the second floor housed the post office and an area for railroad supplies and dry goods. The women of the community could also shop there for needed items while picking up the mail, and they would encounter neighbor women with whom they could chat about their lives and their children while waiting for the store clerk to fill their orders. And men would often gather there after work or on the weekend to talk about their lives, enjoy a bottle of soda, or occasionally play a game of checkers. Most mining companies first issued paper scrip in the form of coupons with designated values or with varied values that would be punched out as they were used. These coupons were only good at the issuing company store, and they were not transferable. However, this was not what the miners wanted, but the operators had the clear advantage. As a result, the discounting of scrip became a common practice. Some merchant or individual would buy the scrip from the miner, paying about 75 cents to the dollar. And then the middleman would turn in the scrip to the issuing company and receive roughly 90 cents in value. Many merchants began accepting scrip for the goods they sold at only 25 cents to the dollar. However, this would change in 1918 when the United States Supreme Court ruled that scrip was transferable and redeemable in cash. Paper scrip was soon replaced by metal tokens after this, which stated their redemption in cash or merchandise, but also claimed they were non-transferable. In spite of this, scrip continued to be accepted outside the issuing company store. Competition would eventually come along and threaten company stores. Sears Roebuck and Montgomery Ward were accessible by mail, and orders were easily delivered by regular train deliveries. And with the many people employed by the mining companies, someone, or should I say some organization, had to be developed to protect the miners. Now, obviously, mining unions have been around since the 1840s, as I previously discussed. However, the big one was formed in 1890, and that was the United Mine Workers of America, which was formed when they teamed up with the National Progressive Union of Miners and Mine Laborers and the Knights of Labor Trade Assembly No. 135. The union was heavily involved in many of the mining strikes, including Paint Creek and Cabin Creek in West Virginia. Quite frankly, it sounds to me that they had many, many reasons to complain, especially in West Virginia. As mine owners focused on market competition, they regularly ignored the well-being of the workers who generated the revenue. Coal miners suffered some of the highest fatality rates among industrial workers, and during the early 1900s, scores of miners died from roof collapses, explosions, and fires every year. Disasters were frequent. The mine safety laws in West Virginia were some of the weakest in the country, and what laws did exist had very few, if any, provisions to ensure their enforcement. And to make matters worse, miners in the state had to contend with low pay, long hours, and exploitation that came with living in company-owned towns. Many of the dissatisfied miners turned to the unions to help them, and this led to outright war in some cases. From 1912 to 1921, the struggle to organize workers in the coal fields sparked a series of very violent episodes. This eventually culminated into the largest armed insurrection since the Civil War in 1921 during the Battle of Blair Mountain, which saw thousands of coal miners in West Virginia revolt against mining owners because of poor wages and poor treatment. And in nearby Logan County, police and miners clashed as fighting erupted on Blair Mountain. Miners, who were unified by their appalling treatment inside mines, fought bravely for 1 week. The situation became so dangerous for civilians that President Harding sent federal troops and warplanes to stop the uprising. Mining owners rejected the proposed peace plan put forth by labor unions, and mining labor unions fell out of favor in West Virginia. So, as you can see, there were no clear winners. And this now gives me a chance to discuss some of the methods by which coal is mined. Now, there are two main ways of coal extraction: above ground mining and underground mining, and I think underground mining is probably the best well known. The most common method is room and pillar mining, and that is a number of parallel entries that are driven into the coal, and the entries are connected by wider entries called rooms that are cut through the coal at right angles to the entries. The resulting grid formation creates thick pillars of coal that support the overhead layers of earth and rock. And there are two main room and pillar systems, the conventional and the continuous. The unit operations of undercutting, drilling, blasting, and loading are performed by separate machines and work crews. In the continuous operation, one machine, the continuous miner, rips coal from the face and loads it directly into a hauling unit. And in both methods, the exposed roof is supported after loading by rock bolts. Another method of underground mining is longwall mining. And in that method, it is carried out in such a manner that large blocks of coal, up to 300 meters wide and 3,000 meters long can be extracted completely. And a block of coal is extracted in slices and then loaded on a conveyor belt. There is also short wall mining, which is basically the same process, but the coal is brought out in much smaller pieces. And now that we have underground mining covered, I think it would be a good time, and it would also make sense to discuss surface mining and some of the methods that are used. One such is contour strip mining. It consists of removing the top rock above the coal seam and then starting at the bottom of the hill and proceeding along the hillside, which creates a bench around the hill. And this also, however, produces a problem of what to do with the waste rock. The waste rock. Currently, it is either carried down the mountain to fill a chosen valley in horizontal layers, or is replaced on the working bench itself, the area around the mine, in places where the coal has been removed. Another method is area strip mining, which is usually used where there is flat terrain. It starts with a box cut made through the above rock to expose a portion of the coal, and the trench is extended to the limits of the property in the strike direction. And after the coal is removed, a second cut is made parallel to the first one, and the waste rock from this cut is placed into the first trench. The process is repeated in several successive cuts until the stripping ratio confirms that continued surface mining is uneconomical. Well, friends, it looks as if the clock's got on us again, doggone it. And if I've sparked your interest in coal mining, I hope you all look into your libraries or do some research of your own to find out some more coal history, because there are other methods of coal mining, and I encourage you all to study them. And I think we've learned that, for better or worse, American industry has changed the way we live. Some ways for the better, others, well, I wouldn't say for the better. And we have also learned, I think, some very interesting ways of coal extraction. And I hope I've encouraged you all to learn more about geology, because I am a devoted student of the science myself, have been ever since 3rd grade. And so I say goodbye and God bless. And remember, don't sell your soul to the company store.